Hi friends, it's Chari, and today I'm making a fun Valentine's card using 4 different mini stamp sets, combining them together to make one card. So the sets I'm using are Stud Puffin, Octopi My Heart, Will You Be Mine, and Sealed with a Kiss. So I've gone ahead and stamped out all the images from these stamp sets. I've stamped 2 of the octopus and all the other ones because they have pairs in each of those. And then I'm just going to do some fun coloring. I thought it would be fun to color some of these images in sort of non-traditional colors. So you might normally color a gray whale, but I am making a blue-violet whale using some BVs. I've got a BV 13 and a BV 11 here. And then for the other one, I'm using some teal colors, some BGs, a BG 32 and a BG 34. And I'm doing very simple shading on this. I just added some shadows on the bottom, blended it out with the lighter one, and then I'm going to go back in and add the dark just for a little bit more added darkness. For my octopi, I'm going to color one of these purple using some violets, a V12 and a V15. So I'm starting with some shadows with that V15, and then I will blend them out with that V12. And I've just put those shadows kind of at the end of every tentacle and up the sides of its head, and I'll just color all that in with that V12. Like I said, very simple shading. I am going to go in with the octopi and add a little bit of detail with some dots in a darker color. So once I have the shading looking the way I want, I'm going to use an even darker violet, which is a V17, and I'm adding some little dots to the bottom of the tentacles, almost like the little sucker pads on an octopus, and then I'll also add a couple dots to the top of his head. For the other one, I'm going to use some RV Copics, so it's going to be a nice pink color. And again, I'm just using 2 shades. I've got the RV14 for the shadows and the RV13 for the lighter. For this one, that RV13 was a little darker than I expected and not too much different from the darker color. So I ended up kind of making this sort of a shadow or shading color on the outside. I tried this RV11, but I didn't like the look of it. So I'm going to switch over to an RV23 to color in the lighter part around the face. And then again, I'm going in with the RV17, which is a little bit darker, and doing the same little dot details that I did on the purple one. Now moving on to my little seals. So I want to make both of these different. I kind of like the idea of these little pairs not being exactly the same colors. So for this one, I'm using my E70. So an E71 and an E74. This is kind of a grayish brown color. I really like using this color for critters. And then for the other seal, I'm using warm grays. So I have a W4 for the shadows here, and then I'm going to come in with a W1. Now there is quite a difference between these two. You can kind of still see my harsh line there. So I'm going to go back in with that W4 and sort of pull that out. And then just blend between the two. And then finally for the puffins, I'm using my toner grays so that it's a slightly different gray than my seals. And these two I will color the same just because they are puffins and pretty much the same. I'm using a T5 for the lighter and a T7 for the darker. So on the first one, I colored it light all over first and then went in with the shadows. On the second one, I'm doing the opposite. I'm doing the shadows first and then I'm going in with the lighter and blending it out. And for the white parts of the puffin, I don't really want it to be bright white, so I'm using an E000, which is a very pale cream color for those white parts. And then for the feet and part of the beak, I'm using an YR16. And then finally, I'll go in with a yellow for that last little part of the beak with that Y17. And then finally, I went in with my R20, my pale pink, and added some little dots for all the cheeks on these little animals. I use my coordinating dies to cut those out, and I'm going to set those aside while I work on the rest of my card. So I wanted to use the hearts stencils for my background. I've got a piece of Ballet Slipper cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. This is going to be the most of the background for my little critters. And then I'm using the Lots of Hearts stencil. I'm starting with this first one, and I'm just going to line it up on my magnetic grid mat here, hold it in place with some magnets. I did put some removable adhesive on the back of the cardstock to hold it in place. And then I'm also using Ballet Slipper ink. So this will give me a nice light tone-on-tone look with those hearts in the background, kind of just a pale pattern that will go behind my critters. For the pinks, I am going to use 2 different shades of pink for my hearts. So this is going to be the lighter of the two, the Ballet Slipper. And it looks a little dark now, but as this ink dries and absorbs into the paper, it really does start to blend with the paper and just give you a very pale look of these hearts onto that pink cardstock. So I'll remove that stencil, and then I'm going to take the other one in this set and line it up to fill in all the voids between those hearts. And then for the second color on this one, I'm going to use Peachy Keen, which is still kind of a peachy pink color. It's still very light, but it is slightly darker than the other one. So that will give a little bit of difference to the hearts. I was just kind of curious as to what this would look like. I liked the way it turned out, but this would also look really great if I used the Ballet Slipper for both layers, which is what you're going to see me do on the teal piece of cardstock. So this is going to be the main background of my card, but I wanted a piece of teal at the bottom to look like water for the proper environment for my octopi and my whales. I also wanted this heart pattern to continue across both of those. So what I've done is I've lined up my stencil with the pink piece, and then I've lined that pink piece up with the teal one so that this pattern is going to look continuous between the pink and the teal. So I pulled that pink out, and now I'm just adding mermaid ink to this mermaid piece of cardstock. This will get cut with a die to have a nice wave at the top. So it is a little bigger than I need it to be. I am going to use the mermaid ink for both layers on this one instead of switching it up with 2. I thought that this would be such a small piece, there was no need to introduce another color, and I didn't want the hearts on this one to be much darker. So again, this is mermaid ink, and as this absorbs into the paper, it is going to lighten up a bit and give you that really nice pale tone-on-tone pattern. So here are my 2 pieces that are my background, and then for the frame, I'm using the Foursquare landscape, and I'm using some peacock cardstock. So I'll just cut that frame out, and this is going to give me my little squares for my little critters to go in. So I'm going to layer all these pieces together, and then I can see where I need to die cut my stitched wave. So I'm just going to tape that in place, and then I'll slide the frame off. And I like that this wave is not going to completely fill those bottom 2 squares with the teal. You're going to have a little bit of that pink peeking out. So it's like these animals are at the top of the ocean. Now I can add all these pieces to my card base. So I'm going to start by putting my pink piece on there. I was just checking that I have it in the right orientation. Don't want to flip it upside down. Otherwise, all that work of making sure my pattern lined up would just be for nothing. And then I can add my waves along the bottom. So I'll just line that up with the bottom of the pink piece, making sure it's nice and straight and lined up, and then my frame is going to cover all that up. So I'll just add some liquid glue all around this frame and apply that directly on top, and then I'll have my 4 little frames for my critters. So I've laid out my little critters where I want them to be, but I'm going to put my sentiment on here first. So I'm starting with a sentiment banner, and I'm cutting that from a strip of Guava Cardstock. And I'm going to use the Happy Valentine's Day sentiment from the Scent with Love add-on set. I'm just going to stamp this in some black ink, and I'm going to stamp it off center towards the left, and this way I can make a shorter banner by using my die again. So I will line up that die to where that sentiment is evenly spaced, and I'll just hold that in place with a little bit of tape, run it through my die cut machine, and then that will cut that little fishtail banner on the other side, and I'll have a shorter sentiment banner for my card. I've added some foam squares to the back, and I'm just going to line that up on that center bar of the frame. And now I can put down all of my critters permanently. So I used some thick foam for the sentiment banner, and for all these little critters I'm using some thin foam just to have some variation in dimension. So all of these are stuck down exactly the same height. I do like how they kind of overlap the edges of the frame a little bit, especially these octopi, because they're a little bit bigger. For the seals, once I got them in place, I felt like their square was lacking a little bit, and so I stamped out that little speech bubble that says moi and added that above their heads, and I think that helped fill in that space much more nicely. Finally, I needed to add a little bit of glitter and shimmer to this card, so I'm just using my Stardust stickles, adding a few dots in each of the frames. This is going to be a very subtle shimmer. I didn't want to cover up that stencil that I worked so hard to stencil in the background, but this just adds a little bit of shine that will catch the eye. And then here is that finished card. I just think it's so cute. I love these mini sets. They're some of my favorites to use, especially for Valentine's Day. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.